for Week 8 of the NFL season. Remember, Inside Injuries is where you get the inside edge on injuries around the NFL and in other sports as well. Be sure to check out our NBA coverage as the season progresses. My name is Tim McCullough. I'm your host here, and with me, as always, from Inside Injuries is Virginia Zakis. Virginia, how are you this afternoon?
Doing well, just trying to stay on top of all of these injuries and practice updates and everything as the week goes on.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you guys actually track this, but are there more injuries this year than in past years?
Unfortunately, I don't know the numbers, but it seems like this year there's less season-ending injuries to the top players, but a lot more injuries we're dealing with to, the top 300 fantasy players. Every week it just seems like there's something new. So definitely seems like there's a lot more going on this year.
Yeah, I agree with you on the season-ending piece. And I was looking through my fantasy teams. The only guy I really lost for the season was Jimmy Garoppolo. I really haven't lost anybody else, or at least nobody else who might come back. I mean, there are some guys who may come back later on.
Yeah, actually, we're about at the time too where we're getting guys like Elijah McGuire and there's some other ones, hopefully Dante Foreman, and there's some others hopefully who'll be coming back that haven't played yet this season. So.
All right, and I think we're going to talk about some of those players a little bit later. For now, let's move on to some of the guys that have been out for quite some time, and fantasy owners are anxiously awaiting to see whether or not these guys are going to come back at all. Specifically, I'm talking about Dalvin Cook. The Vikings, are we ever going to see him on the field again? What's the story with Cook?
So it seems like the Vikings are going to follow the Jags' lead and sit him out through their bye week, which is a great decision. Even if a week from now he feels like he's healthy and he's good to go, sit him a few more weeks. Hamstring strains just never seem to fully heal. Players feel like they're healthy. They start sprinting, cutting, they're feeling okay. They can get back to like that 90, 95%, but it just seems like they never quite get back to 100%. So sitting him through their bye is a great decision. I think after that, he should be healthy enough to return. Still going to be an elevated injury risk, and probably won't be fully recovered until the off season. But I think by sitting him out for the next month, he's gonna get close to full strength and will finally be a contributor in the second half of the season.
And a similar situation is Leonard Fournette. Is he going to be coming back anytime soon, or is it possible that we may lose him for the season?
Yeah, I think he's pretty similar to Dalvin Cook, but the difference I would say is Dalvin Cook was obviously coming off that ACL tear, and when players come back from an injury like this, often their knee is fine, but the rest of their body has to catch up, and I think that's what led to his hamstring tear. Or hamstring strain. Fournette, on the other hand, just always seems to be dealing with injuries. Back in college, it was his ankle. Last year, it was his ankle and foot. So he's just one of those players that kind of always seems to be banged up. So for him, I'm more concerned because if it's not his hamstring and that's fully recovered, it could be something else. His ankle could flare up again. It really could be anything.
Yeah, I think a lot of people when the Jags went out and traded for Carlos Hyde, I think a lot of people were suspicious that maybe Fournette's injury is a lot worse than the team is letting on. Do you think that that's possible, that might be the case?
I think it's possible, but I also feel like they would have put him on IR by now if, there really was a significant tear to the hamstring or they thought they were looking at an injury that would take a few months to heal. But I actually see this as very good news because hopefully even when Fournette returns, it means they won't be handing him the ball 30 times. Maybe Hyde still gets 10 touches and it cuts back on Fournette's carries a little bit, and that'll just help preserve him through the rest of the year.
Yeah, and a lot of our listeners, of course, have been asking about the fantasy value of these players once they start to return. In terms of Cook, I think there's still potential there for him to be an RB1. And if he comes back and he's fully healthy, as he should be, if they wait until after the Week 10 bye, I think what happens is guys like Murray, who've been putting up RB1 like numbers the last couple of weeks, will suddenly lose their value. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that, Murray put up those kind of numbers, more than 20 fantasy points against teams like Arizona and the Jets. Uh, the Vikings have a much tougher schedule ahead, with the exception of 2 games against the Lions. They've really got a tough road to hoe the rest of the way. So while I think Cook could come back and have some really good value, I think Murray's value is in real jeopardy, except for 2 games against the Lions going forward. So if Cook doesn't come back and it ends up being Murray for the rest of the way, uh, I think he's going to have a tough rest of the season. And as far as the Jaguars go, I think even when Fournette does come back, I don't think I want anything to do with that backfield. I think at best, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think what they're going to do is they're going to look to preserve Fournette's health and spread out the workload among those 3 running backs, among the 3 of them, Fournette, Hyde, and also Yeldon will still remain in the mix. It's going to be a true committee, which is going to take away from the fantasy value of all 3 players, really. So that's one situation I want to avoid. In fact, I would advise fantasy owners who are hanging on to Fournette, hoping that that he's going to bring him something over the second half in terms of big time production. I would say you need to temper your expectations and should consider unloading him if you can get decent value in trade. All right, moving on. Let's talk a little bit about Sony Michel. A lot of speculation about his injury, whether it's his old back injury that has gotten worse again, or whether the new injury to the knee is something that just kind of re-aggravated his old injury, or if he's done some additional damage. A lot of people have a lot of questions about Michel going forward. Can you tell us what you know, Virginia?
So obviously, it was a very scary looking injury. It was to his left knee, which is the same one where he suffered a torn ACL back in, I believe, 2011, and then also had that arthroscopic surgery over the summer. So a very concerning history of problems with that knee. Now, the good news is they said the MRI showed no structural damage. That is slightly misleading because there's a good chance he's still dealing with a sprain, which actually means there is a slight bit of ligament damage, just wouldn't need surgery. Um, or it's possible there's some cartilage or meniscus damage. So, not entirely clear what he's dealing with, but right now we're picking up a grade 2 injury, and that means he needs to sit for at least 4 weeks. It does not look like he's going to play this week. He's doubtful, hasn't practiced yet. And I think the Patriots are going to take a cautious approach with him. They really should not rush him back based on his history of knee problems. And at this point, it's more important to look towards the postseason and try to get him healthy for that. But he really is one of those players throughout his career. I think we're going to hear multiple times every season about issues with his knee, whether it's something like this, where you see a specific play that he gets hurt on, or it just kind of flares up on him and he misses some practice time. This is good news is this one is not overly serious, but this is not something that's just going to go away.
Yeah. And again, a lot of our listeners are asking about what's going to happen with James White. Is he actually going to see a bump in value because of this? And what kind of approach do you think that the Patriots might take with their backfield now? I think it's very telling that they haven't brought really anybody in the last week or so to audition to add depth to the roster. I think they're going to go with White and hope that he can carry them until Michel returns. But I also think that fantasy owners should temper their expectations there as well. I don't know that White's going to gain any additional value. He's already pretty highly valued. He's coming in as RB8 so far, which is pretty darn good for a guy that you could have gotten maybe in the 5th or 6th round of drafts. I think what we're going to probably see is we're going to see some Kenyon Barner. He hasn't been bad. He hasn't been great. I mean, 3.9 yards per carry. He can certainly spell White on some of the early downs because they want White in there for third down. That's really his big specialty, third down and catching passes out of the backfield. I think you'll sort of see Barner and White splitting off those first two downs and sort of sharing the workload there. And then White will continue to produce as he has produced. But again, I wouldn't expect any additional value from him. And don't forget, they've also got James Devlin. He's primarily a blocking back. He's the guy who's been there and there a lot since Gronk has been out, sort of taking over Gronk's role as the extra blocker. I think you could also see him pick up some carries to sort of spell Barner and White a bit. But again, he's not someone that you can start in fantasy, and I'm not so sure that I would want to start Barner in anything but the very, very deepest of dynasty leagues. I mentioned Gronk. Let's talk about Gronk a little bit. I know he did return to practice today. Is there something more serious going on, though, than what we've been led to believe about his injuries?
There definitely could be. It's obviously not good that he is dealing with more issues with his back. This time it sounded like back spasms. Generally not a huge concern. It is something that often recurs, but that in and of itself is not a major red flag. But when you combine the back spasms with the fact that he's had, I believe, 3 back surgeries now, and this, I think, is something that we're going to see pop back up again. Of course, Gronk is one of those guys. If he's healthy, if he's active, he always has value, even when he's not healthy. So this is a tough one. I don't think honestly much has changed with him. There's going to continue to be concerns over his back. There will be for the rest of his career, however long that may be. Something to watch. See if you need to make sure he gets back out there tomorrow at practice, which would be a sign that his back responded okay to practice today. So there's still a lot to watch. And again, there's just going to be lingering concerns with his back throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think though, I think one thing I've been telling fantasy owners, I think it's very safe to say that Gronk's days as the